Good evening. Welcome to our Bhagavad Gita section.
Hi, Laksmi.
Yes, how are you?
How are you?
I'm very well.
Can I do the announcement about the mics?
Yes, please. Please do.
Please, 561-317-7173. Can you kindly mute yourself? Because here live, we can see your interventions because you're unmuted. And I'm afraid that all the people that watch the recordings afterwards, it's kind of annoying. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for keeping your eye on things, make sure things are going accordingly. So, welcome to Bhagavad Gita this evening. I will begin, as we normally do, invocation mantras to the principle of teacher along one spiritual path, and to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, my teacher, and we'll begin in this way. One second. No, I don't know. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshuritam Jena Tasmai Sri Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Namayo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vastutyade Shutarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8. Chapter 8 in Srila Prabhupada's translation entitles it Attaining the Supreme. So this is text 1 in chapter 8. Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. So we see during the course of Bhagavad Gita, it is a dialogue primarily between Krishna and Arjuna, where Arjuna throughout Gita asks a series of questions. And here he asks some very important questions to begin chapter 8. Question 1, what is Brahman? Question 2, what is the self? Question 3, what are fruitive activities? Question 4, what is this material manifestation? And question 5, what are the demigods? So we had previously in chapter 7, around the middle of chapter 7, we had a discussion on the demigods. So we'll hear how this is addressed by Krishna after the other questions that Arjuna asks. I want to read this little commentary here. This is from a book called Surrender Unto Me, an overview of the Bhagavad Gita by Burijan Das. It's nice because he kind of summarizes what's going to be taking place. Arjuna first asks, what is Brahman? He wants to know if Brahman refers to the Jiva or the Paramatma. And for those of you who are not familiar with those terms, Jiva usually is in reference to the soul, and Paramatma is the super soul, the super self. Srila Prabhupada writes, Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit. It is said that one should understand that he is Brahman, spirit soul. This Brahman conception of life is also in devotional service. The pure devotees are transcendentally situated on the Brahman platform, and they know everything about transcendental activities. Only persons who perform activities in Krishna consciousness, mam ashritya, are actually entitled to be called Brahman, because they are actually endeavoring to reach the Krishna planet. Such persons have no misgivings about Krishna, and thus they are factually Brahman. Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan analyzes Arjuna's remaining questions as follows. What is the Adhyatma? Asks if the Adhyatma, the self, pertains to the gross or subtle body. What is karma? Asks if karma, activity, refers to fruitive or spiritual activity, and why, if they are equivalent, he should fight. In what is Adibhuta, Arjuna is asking, what gross physical things are you referring to? Items such as pots or the bodies of living beings. Who is the Adidaiva, or the demigods? Asks if the Adidaiva, the governor of the demigods, is a demigod or the Virat Purush, the universal form of the Lord. And we'll discuss more about that in the 11th chapter of the Gita. The prefix Adi is significant. One definition of it is above, over and above. In another respect, then, Arjuna is asking about the identity of the Adi, the one above or ruling over the body, the physical manifestation, and the demigods. In the next verse, he will ask about the identity of the one above all sacrifices, and further, where the Lord resides. So it's a very powerful beginning to the 8th chapter, and these questions are very significant questions. What is Brahman? We've touched on that in the course of our discussions over the first 7 chapters. What is the soul? We've certainly discussed that. Particularly, there's a great deal of emphasis, just for your reference, in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita about what is the soul, the nature of the soul, as opposed to the nature of the bodies. When I say bodies, I mean both subtle and gross bodies. Subtle body is the mind, intelligence, and ego complex, whereas the gross body is what we see, that which is comprised of the gross elements that Krishna refers to in the seventh chapter, the beginning of the seventh chapter, when he says earth, water, fire, air, ether are the gross elements, mind, intelligence, and ego are the subtle elements. So the gross body, the gross manifestation, that is the body that we see, and it is comprised of those five elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And the subtle body is the other three elements, subtle, mind, intelligence, and ego. So he asks that, what is the nature of the body? What is the nature of the physical world? All of these questions are there, and Krishna is about to address them. Verse 2, who is the Lord of sacrifice? And how does he live in the body, O Madhusudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? This is a very nice question, which he very specifically answers in the upcoming verses. So I'll save the answer because the verses coming up will directly answer that question. Text 3, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna says, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruitive activities. So here's a little different take, a little different perspective of how Krishna answers that same question of Brahman. When we get to the 14th chapter, the last verse of the 14th chapter, Krishna says very definitively, he says there that Brahman, let's look at it in the 14th chapter. And it's the last verse of the 14th chapter, which I believe is 27. There, so he answers it here by saying what? The indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. So what is the constitutional nature is self. Now, Krishna addresses that in the 14th chapter, as I said, the 27th verse, and he said, and I am, Krishna, I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness, and which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal. So there, Krishna gives a kind of an overview of Brahman and its qualities or its characteristics, its attributes. Brahman is also would be beingness, the fact that we are eternally existent. Now, there's different schools of thought. Some of you that may have taken yoga or come from a different yoga line may have heard that, Brahman is one singularity, meaning that all that which is the source of everything, the underlying eternal principle is Brahman. So it's not different. Krishna is just a little bit more specific, and accordingly, according to the Bhakti Yoga perspective, that Brahman is comprised of billions and billions of jivas, or souls. So Brahman is the composition which is comprised of billions of souls. So there, according to what Krishna says in the second chapter, there is eternal individuality, which makes up Brahman. The gathering, the conglomeration of all the souls is considered Brahman. Whereas in another school, it's called Advaita. In the Advaita school, Advaita Vedanta, they'll say that there is no individuality. Therefore, Brahman means that which exists without identifying individuality, individual soul. According to Advaita Vedanta, Brahman is thatness, is beingness, is existence, which everything emanates from. But in an ultimate reality of the ultimate issue, there is no individuality. So there is a distinction between the bhakti perspective of Brahman and the Advaita Vedantin perspective of Brahman. And the primary proponent of Advaita Vedanta, or the more impersonal perspective, is Shankaracharya. And then the proponents of the individuality, Brahman being comprised of individuality, billions and billions of souls, you'll have four primary, that's Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Shiva Swami, and Nimbarka. So you have the four bhakti lineages or Vaishnava lineages, and they have all point to that perspective of Brahman. That Brahman is the conglomeration of individual souls, eternally existence in their individuality, as opposed to Advaita Vedanta, which says there is no individuality, there is only this beingness, and how Krishna refers to it, that it is the position of ultimate happiness, immortality, imperishability, eternality. So Krishna gives that perspective also in the 14th chapter, the last verse. So you should know that in the Vedanta, the Advaitin, there is no acceptance of individuality and no acceptance of eternality in form. So there is no singular God, according to Advaita Vedanta. It's only Brahman. That the God figures, meaning, according to Veda, the God figures of Krishna or Vishnu or Shiva or any of the figures therein of Bhagavan or Ishwara, those are all temporary manifestations of Brahman. And then once you come to realize your Brahman nature, then those conceptions are discarded. They're no. So in the Advaita Vedanta, or the impersonal perspective of ultimate reality, no form, only the only the singularity of Brahman, or the eternal existence, imperishable, immortal, and the place of happiness, free from any suffering. Now, where does bhakti differ? Bhakti differs in the fact that bhakti, from the bhakti perspective, there is an acceptance of both. Actually, there is acceptance of three manifestations of divinity. And that's Brahman, which we are talking about in its dual perspectives, either as innumerable jivas or living entities, or the oneness, the imperishable beingness, the uniform consciousness. There's that. Bhakti accepts that existence. There is Paramatma, which means the presence of divinity in the heart of all living entities. In other words, from the Bhakti perspective, every life form, it is a life form, whether it be a tree, a bird, a dog, a cat, a deer, a human being, demigod, is in existence because of the presence of the jiva or the soul. But also from the bhakti perspective, there is the presence of divinity, separate and distinct presence of divine soul. And the Sanskrit word that refers to that presence is called Paramatma. Param means supreme, Atma means soul. So distinct and different from the jiva, the soul, the individual spark, which emanates from the great fire, as spoken about in the Vishnu Purana. That individual spark, which is you and me and the dog and the cat and all living entities, our bodies are motivated, our yantras, our machine made of material energy is motivated because of the presence of that spark, and that spark is the jiva, and that is the individual consciousness that we possess, all of us. We possess the consciousness of Eleonora in Eleonora's body, or of Lakshmi in Lakshmi's body, or Sid in Sid's body, because those are three different jivas. Sid is a jiva who possesses that body. Lakshmi is a jiva who possesses this body. And Eleonora is a jiva who possesses that body. And our presence within our distinct form, how do we get our form, is discussed herein in the form of karma. Karma means that somehow or another, we as jivas, as spiritual sparks, enter into prakriti. Prakriti means the material energy, and causes activation of that prakriti, the material energy. Because without the presence of the soul, there cannot be activation, cannot go from embryo to old age. That whole progression or evolution of the body as we know it, from embryo to old age and ultimately death, is due to the presence of the jiva, the individual spark of consciousness. So the Bhakti Yoga perspective, and we are in the Bhakti section of the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhakti Yoga perspective accepts that there is jiva, soul, in each and every form, and right next to that jiva, I think it's the Svetashvatara Upanishad that describes it as, the analogy is two birds in a tree sitting on the same branch next to each other. One is acting and the other one is witnessing. So the soul within the confines of the body is acting, and the super soul, Paramatma, is witnessing our actions and responding accordingly. What does that mean? In the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Sarvasya chaham ridi sanavishto matak smritir jnanam aponam cha. So responding accordingly means that the Paramatma is the source of remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness, depending on the desire and the intention of the soul. In other words, if the soul wants to forget its constitutional position as Brahman, then that also comes from Paramatma, the ability to forget one's position. So if one is not in recognition of the soul, the presence of the soul, that means because that's what you want. You want to be in that forgetful stage or state. And therefore, the Paramatma reciprocates by being the source of forgetfulness. But on the other hand, if we want to know the real nature of the self, then that will also come from Paramatma. So basically, the witnessing bird in the tree, meaning the super soul, is responding to our desires. So how we are desiring, what we are putting out, then there is a subsequent response coming from Paramatma. So the Bhakti tradition sees Brahman, recognizes Brahman and its position, recognizes Paramatma, the supreme or divinity within the heart, seated next to the living entity, and very clearly the Bhakti Yoga perspective accepts that there is a supreme personality of Godhead, meaning that all of these exist. But from the Bhakti perspective, the summum bonum, or the source of Brahman and the source of Paramatma, is Bhagavan, the supreme personality of Godhead. That's why sometimes Bhakti Yoga, as practiced in our particular lineage, is called Krishna Bhakti, because the recognition of the supreme personality amongst all the personalities that are present within this world, divine and not divine, meaning Shiva, Brahma, Indra, Agni, Varuna, Vayu, Chandra, Surya, all of these different personalities that you may hear, who are possessors of great deal of power, siddhis, mystic siddhis, and other remarkable abilities to do things. All of those personalities emanate from one supreme personality. So while the Abrahamic religions are very specific that God, there's only one God, whether it be Allah or Jehovah, also the lineage, the Bhakti Yoga perspective, the Bhakti Yoga lineage also has that same view that there is one God from which everything emanates. Even avatars, different divine personalities like Buddha or Matsya, Kurma, Narasingha, Vishnu, all of these divine incarnations or avatars, they are also emanations from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's kind of, I wanted to give you an understanding, an overview of, sometimes I say things that may be a little bit different than what you may have heard in another yoga school, or it's because this is the Bhakti Yoga perspective. Much of it comes out of the Gita, and particularly chapters 7 through 12 are very Bhakti oriented. And that's kind of the overview of the distinction. So to recap what I just said, the Bhakti Yoga perspective is the acceptance of three manifestations of divinity: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And then the Krishna Bhakti is that there is, in Bhagavan, there are many avatars that are referred to as Bhagavan, but all of those avatars are emanations from one supreme avatari. The word used in the Bhagavatam, the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavad Purana, which is different than the other incarnations, is avatari, which means the origin of the avatars. The other avatar means one who descends. So these divine personalities like Nishringa and Kurma and Matsya and Buddha and all these different divine incarnations that are coming, they are ultimately emanations from the divine singular personality, Bhagavan. And in Gita, especially if Prabhupada or Baladev Bhushan, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, the great Ramanujacharya, those different translations are all pointing to what I just said, in terms of the breakdown of divinity and the various manifestations. So I know it's a little deep, but try to understand it in perspective, in context, and it'll be a lot easier for you to understand. Okay, so we did 3, right? Yeah. So we're on 4, text 4. O best of the embodied beings, the physical nature, which is constantly changing, is called Adibhuta. Another name for that, the material manifestation, would be Prakriti. It's the physical, that's what Krishna says in the 7th chapter. He refers to that as his inferior energy. Another name would be the temporary manifestation of this energy in order to bring about the material manifestation as we know it. And the one thing to realize from the Bhagavad Gita perspective is that Prakriti does not have consciousness. Prakriti does not have consciousness. Prakriti responds to consciousness. It goes through an evolution, a change, through the presence of consciousness, which is Purush, or the spirit soul, the jiva. Due to that presence, that combination will give us what we got, the world around us, the world outside, the external world. It'll give us that. So that's made very clear in the 7th chapter, and Krishna repeats these different understandings so that we are clear with it. So Adibhuta is the material manifestation. The universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods, like those of the sun, Surya, and moon, Chandra, is called Adidaiva. And so here Krishna makes a distinction between the demigods. And I just rattled off some demigods: Shiva, Brahma, Indra, Agni, demigods and demigoddesses, Lakshmi, Durga, all the different, Saraswati, all the different manifestations, either in feminine or masculine form. So here Krishna is saying, and I, the Supreme Lord, represented as the super soul in the heart of every embodied being, am called Adi Yagya, the Lord of Sacrifice, which means that the responsibility in this world of the human being is to perform sacrifice, and not just sacrifice for personal benefit, but sacrifice for the pleasure of that supreme person that Krishna is identifying herein. That sacrifice, which is aimed at the pleasure of the supreme person, is the essence of what Bhakti Yoga is. Bhakti Yoga is the performance of all one's activities, be they mental, physical, intellectual, etc. We see that as an offering. That is our sacrifice. That's what makes it sacrifice. The fact that we are taking that and offering it to the Supreme. Our actions, Nishkama Karma Yoga, which means that we don't see the fruits of those actions as ours. But again, they are to be offered to the Supreme, and then they're experienced. So the distinction is, if you between karma and nishkama karma, is if you just act and then the fruits, the results of your actions you enjoy, that's called karma. And that kind of action is what keeps us bound up in this material world. Why? because when you perform karma, there's actions that are good actions, proper actions, and there's actions that are improper or bad actions. And both of them have reactions. When you're acting in that regard, you're generating reactions to your actions. That's the principle of the material manifestation. That if you're acting within it and only concerned with it, meaning the material manifestation and your interaction with it, then you're under one set of laws. That set of laws is called the law of karma. And the law of karma is action and reaction. So if you do good actions, you do charity work, your acts of kindness, acts of charity, giving of food, building of parks, planting of trees, all of these things are called sukriti, good actions, and therefore you'll get good reactions to that. What are examples of good reactions? Well, good looks, beauty is one result of good karma. Wealth, to be born into a wealthy family, is another reaction, good reaction. Good health. Do you know that person that eats anything, can digest it with no problems, but you have a very sensitive digestion? If you eat too much or eat this food or that, you react to it. Well, people ultimately have good digestion, powerful digestion. That will lead to good health, according to Ayurveda, because in Ayurveda, the how your digestion functions is indicative of how healthy or ill you will be. In other words, if you have weak digestion, then there's a good chance there'll be toxic buildup, and the result of toxic buildup are various illnesses, diseases. So again, to get back to the original point, the good reaction is beauty, wealth, health, and knowledge. Those are usually indicators. Like sometimes we'll see somebody who's just like, very good looking, very intelligent, good karma babies, we could call them. So that's the understanding. That comes from interaction within the material manifestation with only a concern for that. And therefore, those kinds of actions will give you reactions, both good and bad. Bad reactions will be not having beauty, not having access to knowledge, poor, and illness. Those are usually 4 indicators of bad karma, or experience of bad karma. So in bhakti, as I was saying, when one acts in sacrifice, meaning that our actions, the fruits of our actions, are offering to the Supreme, then that comes under a whole other jurisdiction. And that jurisdiction is the jurisdiction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, what happens to us, one way or another, we recognize to be the intervention or the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because we are acting under that jurisdiction as opposed to the jurisdiction of Prakriti, or the material manifestation. So karma, that's what's being discussed here. And Adi Yagya means that we recognize that there is a Lord of sacrifice, and therefore we, as bhakti practitioners, all of our actions and the results of our actions are as an offering. I hope that's clear. If not, you certainly are invited to ask a question at any time. And so, particularly if you don't want that question to slip by, or you want to keep it fresh. Okay, 5, text 5. And here we get into two answers that Krishna gives Arjuna that is very important for us, whether you're a bhakti practitioner or not. These two things that Krishna is mentioning right now is very important, because the question I'll pose is, what determines where we go? If, let's say hypothetically, I'm not saying you're a believer or not, but hypothetically, if you accept that the soul is eternal and it has no beginning, no end, and so what happens at death? What determines what happens, or what directs the soul at the point of death? And here's what Krishna says in 5. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. What does Krishna's nature mean? It means that divine, transcendental relationship. Our nature, according to the principles of bhakti, our nature is to eternally engage in loving relationship with that Supreme Personality of Godhead. So when we attain that nature, it means Krishna, or the Supreme Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality, nature is to reciprocate in love. That is his nature. So when we attain that nature, that means we attain the nature that we are reciprocating in love with the Supreme Personality of God. So we will attain that nature if we are meditating at the time of death on that Supreme. So that is why people are afraid of bhakti in one regard. People are afraid of bhakti because it's so specific. Bhakti yoga, there is an alambana, an object of meditation, and that object of meditation is your Ishtadev, your worshipable Supreme Personality of Godhead. And one sadhana in bhakti, especially as one progresses, one gets more and more purified. That sadhana is very specific to that Supreme Person. In other words, we are actually serving specifically a personality in a very specific mood. And that's important to understand, because Rupa Goswami says that there are different moods of love. And he lists 5: neutrality, servitude, friendship, parental, and conjugal. So the sadhana that one performs as one's heart becomes purified becomes specific to a mood in relationship to a Supreme Divine Person. So that means if the mood that we are attracted to as the purification is taking place is to be the servant of God, or the friend of God, or the parent of God, or the lover, beloved of God, then that is what directs our sadhana to go in a very specific way. And that's why there are different manifestations of Vishnu and Krishna, because accordingly, when one develops a very specific mood of service and loving attraction, then there is a very specific manifestation of that one form of that Supreme Person. When you read the Bhagavad Purana or the Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll see within the 10th canto that Krishna has three different moods, predominant moods, loving moods that he reciprocates with his devotee. The Vrindavan mood, the Mathura mood, or the Dwarka mood. And he reciprocates according to the mood. In Vrindavan, it's God with his hair down, very informal, very very friendly, very joking, very intimate. Like all of the stories of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Purana, you'll see that the exchanges, and this is to give us insight to what we are shooting for in bhakti. We meditate on those loving exchanges, or the reciprocal exchanges that are going on between the Supreme Personality, Krishna, and those devotees, those who are in various moods, loving moods. For instance, Krishna will reciprocate with the cowherd boys in friendship. So that love, when you have a love, can all of you say you have a friend that you love? Right? You can all say that, right? I have friends that I love dearly. Today is the birthday of one of my dear friends, Badarayan. Happy birthday, Badarayan. So love is there on a friend basis, and it has a very specific flavor, does it not? So because in Vrindavan, within the vast body or society of devotees there are personalities who relate to Krishna on a friend basis, intimate friendship basis. They may throw a ball, they may run, go swimming, all of these things that we may enjoy doing here in this world. And the reason we do enjoy these things, this kind of play, is because this is a reflection here, this world, this prakritic world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So these moods, intimate moods of love, particularly the three, which is friendship, parental, and conjugal or intimate love exchange, boy girl, you could say, like that, love exchange. These moods exist eternally in that divine spiritual realm. And the flavor of each love is different. And use as a reference point your love for your friends, your love for your parents, and your love for your beloved. Use that as a reference point, the flavor of that love, and that gives you an indication of the love flavor that we develop in our sadhana in relationship to that divine personality, God. Now, you see in like Abrahamic religions, for instance, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, you'll see that there's an acceptance of one God, but not much description of how you love that God. Or if there is, it's more in the mood of awe and reverence, meaning God the Almighty, God the All-Powerful, God the All-Merciful. But when there is a call for description of how in this world you can relate, you can practice, it really doesn't go much beyond prayer. That there's different, types of prayer, and you can study the lives of great saintly persons within those traditions. Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Teresa, Saint Catherine, the various saints, and the loving mood that they developed in relationship to their God. or their perspective, the God as he manifests to them. And then you look in the Islamic tradition, Rumi, and many others, and this God is so powerful, we can't even imagine his what he looks like. No, you can't even imagine that. Too far beyond. So that awe and reverential mood is there. See, and that's what distinguishes bhakti, and particularly Krishna bhakti. Because if you talk about Vishnu bhakti, for instance, Vishnu bhakti is also awe and reverential. You don't get the intimacy that's contained in Krishna bhakti. So again, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, as they surrender unto me, I reward accordingly. So the sadhana in bhakti is geared toward a particular loving mood, loving flavor that we are cultivating. Now, in the initial stages, we don't know what loving relationship we have with God. So therefore, we perform bhakti according to rules and regulations. That's called Vaidhi bhakti. And the whole point of Vaidhi bhakti, the rules and the regulations, the chanting of japa, the chanting in kirtan, etc., although those can also be there they are there in elevated forms of bhakti like Raganuga bhakti. But it is meant for our purification and our education. But ultimately, when the purification and the education begins to manifest within the heart, then there becomes an attraction to a particular type of exchange or reciprocation with the Supreme. And that only comes when one is following strictly the sadhana, and the purification and education take place. And then there's contemplation of a particular mood of loving reciprocation with the Supreme. So it's very, very specific. That's one thing which frightens people of bhakti. Another thing which frightens people of bhakti is it really entails commitment. But you look at the definition of love that comes out of the world of psychology and counseling, etc. One of the attributes of love, having a relationship in this world with your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever, is commitment. That's one of the affection is there, respect is there, trust is there, but also commitment, which means long-standing relationship. So quite naturally, if commitment is a manifestation of love in this world, and this world is a reflection of the divine world, the spiritual world, so quite naturally, commitment has to be there if we are to advance. And even in the other yoga disciplines, there's commitment. In Hatha Yoga, there's commitment to asana on a whole other level. There's commitment to Raj Yoga and meditation, as spoken about by Patanjali. There is commitment on the upper levels as we advance in any yoga system. In Bhakti, it's just very specific to love relationship, love reciprocation with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I hope I make that's clear. So that's what Krishna says. If you're remembering me alone, and what does Krishna say? What did Krishna say in the second chapter? One contemplates. What one contemplates, one becomes attached to. And that attachment leads to desire. So in our sadhana, what is our sadhana? Our sadhana is a contemplation on our relationship with the Supreme. What does that lead to? An attachment to the Supreme. What does that lead to? That attachment leads to an ever increasing desire to be with that divine personality, that supreme personality, in loving relationship through commitment. So Krishna says, you meditate, you contemplate on me, then you'll attain my nature. That nature means the love reciprocation. That's there. And when you read in the 10th canto of the Bhagavad Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, you see the nature of the love, the sweetness. The word that's quite often used is sweetness, the sweetness of that loving exchange. Next one, text 6. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So this again points to our sadhana and what we are contemplating on, our sadhana, our japa meditation. When we do kirtan, what are we meditating on? That's what Krishna is saying here. Whatever state of being one remembers. So our sadhana, what does Patanjali say sadhana is? That we do something repeatedly over a long period of time. It creates the samskaras, the impressions within our mind that help us at that critical juncture at death, at the point of death, to remember our alambana. In the bhakti tradition, the bhakti yoga tradition, our alambana, our object of meditation, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So to attain that state of being means to attain that loving relationship. We are thinking of that loving relationship at our time of death. And we know that people think of their loved ones at their time of death. Isn't that a fact? People, historically, when people are on their deathbed, they're calling out the name of their wife or their husband. They're calling out the name of their children. They're calling out the names of their loved ones. Because love is a powerful magnetic force. And the magnetism of love draws consciousness to it by its potency. So if we are to understand that most people remember their loved ones at the time of death. So Krishna is saying here, if you cultivate a loving relationship with me, at the time of death, you will remember me, you will come to me. Now, what's the distinction? You say, okay, I'm calling out my son or my daughter, so I'll get a good birth. I'll get a birth with them or something like that. No, the distinction is they are mortal beings, and you will remember your interaction with them in the realm of Prakriti. So you'll return to the realm of Prakriti. But the nature of loving relationship, loving exchange, loving reciprocation with the Supreme, that magnetic force draws us to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and love and action of an eternal nature. So that means we transcend the Prakritic world. We no longer return to it and its laws of karma, but rather we enter into another realm, a divine, immortal realm where these various loving exchanges take place for an eternity. So just think of it. What is the motivation of a bhakti yoga? Just think, if you have experienced in this world a love, and the result of that love is things that you do with your lover are so beautiful, so blissful. Imagine being in a situation, in a realm where you are constantly reciprocating lovingly, selflessly, and experiencing the joy of that loving reciprocation. That is what Krishna is asking you to meditate on here in these two verses. And that is the whole point of Bhakti Yoga, is to cultivate that divine, loving reciprocation. Thank you. It's 8 o'clock. I would like to open up the floor. Anyone who has any question or comment. It's a mouthful, but
I do.
yes, Eleonora.
Is Advaita Vedanta the only school that considers this oneness with one God, no individuality, or there is another school that does that too?
Well, there are other schools that also will consider oneness as opposed to bhakti, because there's 6 darshans in the Vedanta tradition. You have Nyaya, Karma Mimamsa, Yoga, Vedanta, the 6 different schools, and each one of those schools focusing on a particular perspective. It's the division of Vedanta as promoted by Vyasadeva that is spoken about by Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, the 4 different acharyas in bhakti, but the other ones also can refer. And then you have the not 6 darshan, you have Buddhism, which does not consider afterlife at all. There's no soul, there's no afterlife, nothing like that. Yeah,
and I have a second one.
Yes, please.
Vrindavan is the informal way of relating. What are the ways for Mathura and Dwarka?
Well, Dwarka is more formal. It's more the Aishwarya, where the supreme is seen as a king, and Krishna is viewed as a king in Dwarka. There is also intimacy, because you have Krishna and Rukmini, but it's formalized in the relationship of husband-wife. It's called Parakiya as opposed to Swakiya. The Parakiya Ras is formal love. Krishna is married to Rukmini or Jambavati or Satyabhama. He has a wife and a loving relationship with that wife. In Vrindavan, Krishna is flirting with all the gopi girls.
The gopis, yeah.
Yeah, he's breaking convention, whereas in Dwarka there is convention.
Okay.
Dwarka and Mathura also there is, but in Vrindavan there's no real rules and regulations. It's unbridled love, whereas in Dwarka, it's a more formalized relationship. And then you have beyond that, then you have the various Narayan manifestations, and that's strictly with Narayan, the Lakshmi Narayan, that is strictly Aishwarya, that is strictly awe and reverence. That this Narayan feature of this is my Lord, I am his servant, and so that is there. Dwarka is not that, because you can have like Rukmini and you have different relationships, but it is still more formalized. Where in Vrindavan, it's unbridled. No boundaries are there. No conventions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Anyone have any comments or questions or observations? Be happy to open the floor for you if you'd like to say anything. If not, I won't keep you. Thank you so much for being here with me this evening. Next week, I just wanted to ask you, next week I'll be traveling on Wednesday. So we can do one of two things. We could either move it to Tuesday evening, or we could just cancel the class for next week. I don't know how flexible you all are, so if anyone wants to give me any feedback, because I'll be on the road all of Wednesday driving up to New Jersey and New York area for the New York Rath Yatra.
Is Thursday an option?
Thursday probably won't be an option either, because I think we're not staying in one place. I think we're being hosted, if I'm correct, hosted Thursday and Friday. The best option would be Tuesday, and if that's not doable, then we'll just have to cancel Wednesday and resume the following Wednesday.
I'm working, so Tuesday is not for me.
Okay. Anybody else have any? Sid, how are you doing over there? Okay.
Yes.
Anyway,
fine.
how are you, Sid? You're healing?
Slowly but surely.
Wonderful,
As you
wonderful.
well
Sid, yeah, Sid just went through a knee transplant, so he's recovering from that. So I know you're pretty much home. Are you good for Tuesday?
Well, I watched that Simrad Bhagavatam group.
Okay.
Tuesdays,
So
but
maybe,
I could just switch. I could watch Kasturi on Wednesday and you on Tuesday. It's not a big deal.
okay. All right. So what I'll do is I'll put it out there. Anyone want to contact me and tell me it's okay. So we got a sense Eleanor who attends quite frequently, and Sid who attends quite frequently, and Gokula Priya who attends, and I know her schedule, and Ishwari Radha who attends, and David sometimes is there, and who's that? Corina?
No.
Yeah, you guys can just let me know one way or the other, and I'll put it up on Facebook. I notice, it'll either be moved or we'll just cancel. Again, folks, thank you so much for giving me your association. I'm really just coming off of a weekend high of association. We went to the Sadhu Sangha in Dallas, Texas, which was a gathering of 2,700 bhakti yogis, and lots of chanting, lots of kirtan, lots of katha, speaking on different topics from the Bhagavatam. It was really quite wonderful, and so it is a great source of happiness having us to associate in this way. And even in psychology, in the field of psychology, which is studying happiness, one of the first points that they make is community. It's really important to be involved with a community of like-minded people, and that becomes the source of great happiness. Even on, from a psychological perspective, the studies, the research that they're doing. So, your association is most joyful for me and my son, Nishringadev, who's here. He's behind me listening in. So, and my wife, thank you very much. There's Nishringadev coming out of the shadows. Hey, Haribo. All right. So, till we meet again. Thank you very much, and Hare Krishna to you all.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Your explanations are really very, very clear to me. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm glad that I can serve in that capacity.